A brush stroke of beauty or a signature of death? Welcome to Fog Casebook. I'm Vela. This community is incredible. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your words always make these mysteries come alive. A sallow light lay upon Baker Street that November morning, the sort of wan, reluctant daybreak that seems to have mislaid the sun somewhere over the chimneys of Marylebone. Holmes had taken possession of the hearthrug like a solitary heron, all bone and concentration, his long fingers teasing a pale ribbon of ash from the bowl of his pipe. He had not spoken for 10 minutes together. It was the stillness that generally preceded some whimsical thrust of his mind into a corner of London that no one suspected had corners at all. Mrs. Hudson's step on the stair, a brisk tap at the door, and then our visitor entered, an elegant woman in a travelling cloak of black broadcloth, the hem dulled by brick dust, her face half-veiled and, beneath it, quite as white as the fog beyond the window. "Lady Lydia Hawthorne," said Holmes without turning. "Pray take the chair nearest the fire. Your coachman is still engaged in explaining to a very obstinate constable that a whip is not an offensive weapon, and that he has, in any case, no intention of striking anyone with it." The veil quivered. "Mr. Holmes, how could you—" Holmes made a small, impatient gesture that in him passed for reassurance. "The mud, the perfume, the paper. Elementary. Your hem carries the red dust peculiar to Henrietta Street, historically due to a compositor's yard, and now to a certain fashionable studio's habit of sweeping pigment into their gutter. Your gloves, French kid faintly perfumed with Parma violet, were handled recently with spirits of turpentine. An artist shook your hand not 20 minutes ago. As for the constable, I heard him." She bowed her head and sat, clutching a folded newspaper. "I am told you do not waste time with trifles, Mr. Holmes. I pray you will not waste it now." "Not if you place it properly upon the board," he returned, and at last turned to face her. "Dr. Watson, you will oblige me by making a note of the lady's narrative in your usual faithful style. We have business." Watson, whose habit is to attend to the practical when the extraordinary steps in at the door, poured a little brandy into a glass and set it by our visitor's hand. Thus fortified, she pushed the newspaper across the table. The headline ran in those cruel black letters the morning press keeps ready for calamity. "Murder in a painter's studio society artist under arrest. Lucian Armitage," she said, and the mere utterance of the name seemed to drain her. "You will have heard it. He is the most sought-after portraitist in town. He is my fiancé." Holmes's expression did not alter, but the pupils of his eyes took on that curious pin's head brightness which tells me he is past politeness and into the regions of his craft. "Proceed, Lady Lydia." "The thing happened last night at Armitage's studio in Henrietta Street. He had been working late upon a commission for Sir Saul Dilke, the steel magnate. The sitter was Sir Saul's ward, Miss Evelina March. At a little past 9 o'clock, Sir Saul and Mr. Armitage's man, a German named Ruprecht, forced the door and found—" She faltered, then regained a painful composure. "Found Miss March lying upon the studio floor quite dead. Mr. Armitage was there, faint with shock, they say. And on the easel—oh, Mr. Holmes, I can scarcely bring myself—" Holmes inclined his head a fraction. "The portrait," she whispered. "Unfinished, yet unmistakable. Evelina, in the very gown she wore that evening. But across the throat, the painter's last broad stroke, there was a smear of vermilion, thick as if laid with a palette knife, precisely where the poor girl had been cut." Holmes's pipe went out unnoticed. Watson felt, as he has felt in the presence of violent death even at remove, that singular pressure at the temples by which the brain prepares itself to be of use. "You will say," Lady Lydia continued, that it is monstrous. Scotland Yard thinks, of course they think, that he painted the crime, that he could not help himself, that in some dreadful inspiration, artist and murderer became the same hand. They arrested him at once, but they are wrong, Mr. Holmes. They must be. Let us not anticipate Scotland Yard's conclusions, Holmes murmured. What of the room? Locked, said Lady Lydia. From the inside, the key was on the carpet. The windows were bolted and the skylight fastened with an iron hasp. There was no sign of an intruder, save, oh, there was one thing. Ruprecht says he smelled bitter almonds. The inspector, Lestrade, I think, remarked that painters often use noxious chemicals and wrote it down with great satisfaction. Bitter almonds. Holmes glanced at me. You see, Watson, our little friend Chemistry is invited to the party. Cyanide, photographers use it. Painters do not, at least they should not, unless they are very ignorant or very ingenious. He returned his gaze to Lady Lydia. You mentioned a German servant. Where is he now? Detained for questioning, but not under arrest. Mr. Armitage, Lucian, insisted he had dismissed the man earlier in the evening. He says he worked alone after 7, that Evelina left at past. She must have returned, if she returned, at all. After he had taken a little wine and fallen asleep in the chair by the fire, that is his statement. Sir Saul says it is nonsense. He states he sent Evelina back for her reticule, which she had left, and that she never came home. Holmes's nostrils flared, very slightly, as if catching a thread of scent in the fog of evidence. And what says the reticule? It was found hanging upon the back of the sitter's chair, she replied. Untouched. Holmes paced to the window, and with the edge of his cuff polished a circle in the misted pane, peering down at the street as though the answer might pass on a hansom. You were betrothed to this painter, Lady Lydia. Tell me how he works. He was methodical, she said. He is a slave to light. He paints in the mid-morning and then again after luncheon. After dusk he only sketches and finishes detail under a lamp. He keeps his pigments in labelled jars, his brushes in order of size, his turpentine corked. He is a man of rules. A man of rules, Holmes repeated. And yet the last stroke on the canvas, a gross, theatrical wound, laid with a knife, a rule broken. Curious. He returned to the table and tapped the newspaper gently with one knuckle. What is not in this account, Lady Lydia, that you could not tell the police? People only come to me for those things. She stared at her gloved hands. When she lifted her gaze, there was both courage and shame in it. Lucian borrowed money of Sir Saul, a considerable sum. Half the town sits in Sir Saul's pocket. He buys men the way other men buy shirts. Lucian promised a portrait for the National Gallery in return for patience. He has not delivered. Sir Saul threatened to ruin him. And Evelina. The name caught. She was fond of him, too fond. There were whispers. I do not know what to believe. The room absorbed the confession. In the grate, a coal shifted and fell, sending up a little tower of sparks that collapsed at once into red dust. Thank you, said Holmes, with a gentleness that was rarer in him than brilliance, but not less valuable. Watson, your hat, Lady Lydia, your courage is of the sort that deserves expedition. We shall see Henrietta Street at once. He took his overcoat from the peg, and then, as if struck by a recollection no less urgent for being absurdly ordinary, he pointed to the small trail of brick dust Lady Lydia had drawn across the threshold. One last matter. You came here by way of Maiden Lane, turned right, and quarrelled with a costermonger at the corner. You were carried on the second half of your journey by hansom, not by brougham. Your veil shows the diagonal flecking the former's open construction inevitably permits in this weather. She gave a tiny laugh that was all relief and no mirth. "You are a very strange man, Mr. Holmes." "So my friend tells me," he returned. "But it sometimes gets me from the door to the truth. Come, Watson." The fog met us like a living thing, coiling and parting as if suspicious of our purpose. We found a cab with difficulty. The driver peered down a vague hat above a vague scarf. "Henrietta Street," Holmes called, and we moved like a ghost through a city of ghosts, past shop lamps that burned in their own small worlds, past grim-faced policemen whose boots struck sparks from the wet stones. Henrietta Street lay under that peculiar hush which comes when art and scandal meet. A knot of idlers had gathered under the police cordon. Their whispers drifted like scraps of paper. The studio door bore a smear of sealing wax and the official stamp. Lestrade himself, lean as a knitting needle and twice as industrious, detached himself from the constables and tipped his bowler to us with a mixture of exasperation and relief that was his tribute to Holmes's interference. "So you've come, Mr. Holmes. Couldn't keep you away with a regiment," he said. "Nasty business. Painters are wrong and always said so. Temperament, they call it. I call it trouble." Holmes's eyes had already gone beyond the inspector, measuring the lintel, the lock, the skylight chain visible through the fanlight, the faint drag of red across the doorstep where some careless heel had carried the studio's dust into the honest street. "You will give me 10 minutes alone," he said, with that quiet imperiousness which even Lestrade, practical man that he is, grudgingly obeys when the stakes are high. "After that, Inspector, I am at your disposal." "And him?" Lestrade jerked his chin at the woman who had followed us so far and no further. "She waits here," Holmes replied. "For now, the dead will be better company to me than the living." He broke the seal. The door swung inward upon that peculiar odour, oil and chalk and the faintest unmistakable trace of bitter almonds that attends a room where beauty has been taught to sit still and, last night, death had learned to move. Holmes crossed the threshold without a word. Watson followed, and the case, as surely as if a curtain had risen, began. Lestrade stood aside with that air of magnanimity he assumes when compelled to be obliging. Holmes went first, and I close after him, into the cool breath of the studio. It was a long chamber, glassed above by a slanting skylight and flanked upon the north wall by a regiment of canvases that leaned, face to the plaster, like soldiers at ease. The floorboards were blotched and freckled by years of pigment, and everywhere were the signs of a careful disorder. The kind of chaos that belongs to a man who knows precisely where everything lies, though no other soul could find a pin among it. Near the hearth stood a tall easel with its burden, the portrait of a young lady 3/4 turned, the pale column of her throat rising from ivory lace. Across that white expanse, as Lady Lydia had said, lay a single brutal swathe of red. The colour had sunk and wrinkled at its edges. It was heavy and coarse as if thrust on in haste, and, to my untrained eye, horribly suggestive of a wound. Holmes neither stared nor shuddered. He took the room as a surveyor takes a field, by boundaries, elevations, and lines of approach. He crouched at once to the threshold, where a faint skid of red dust had been tracked over the sill into the corridor beyond. With a long forefinger, he traced the arc of a heel, then, producing his lens, blew gently to dislodge a single, glittering flake. "Vermilion crystals, mingled with pumice," he murmured. "Scraped palette, not tube fresh. Someone cleaned a knife here, and did it clumsily." Lestrade cleared his throat. "Painter's work, that. I've the palette knife in my pocket. Took it off the table yonder, red on the edge. What more do you want?" "Chronology," Holmes replied dreamily, and crossed to the fire. The grate was neat, but for two small facts: a pinch of grey ash that had escaped the fender, and a smell, fugitive, then gone, that tugged at an old memory from my medical school. Holmes lifted the tinderbox, sniffed it, and moved on. "You remarked bitter almonds, Inspector?" "I did, and set it down," Lestrade said. "But the doctor says the girl bled to death. No poison needed. Painters keep all manner of villainous liquids. Cyanide, eh? I fancy your chemistry is leading you down a garden path." "Not if the path returns me to the door," said Holmes, already at the casement. The windows were shut and bolted. He examined the bolts only long enough to run a nail along a faint bright line where iron had touched iron recently. "New scrapes on old metal," he observed. Not conclusive, but talkative. He passed beneath the skylight, where a chain hung down to a hook fixed in the wall. The iron hasp above was engaged. Holmes mounted a painter's stool the better to see it, and I steadied the legs. He did not touch the fastening, but rather the wood surrounding it, where, with the point of his knife, he teased from a shallow crevice a thread so fine that it might have been a spider's work. He set it upon his thumb and peered through the lens. "Sable hair," he said. "Brush tip, broken, not cut." "Artists' hairs all over the place," Lestrade protested. "You'll tell me next that the murderer was a weaver because I've a rug on the floor." Holmes gave a little bow of concession and returned to the easel. He stood a long moment, head tilted. Then, with the pencil he kept behind his ear, he touched the lower ripple of the red stroke. When he withdrew it, there clung the faintest stain, as if the paint were tacky, still in one creased hollow. He held the pencil to his lip, tested, and wiped it upon his handkerchief with a look of satisfaction that boded ill for someone. "Watson, your finger," he said. I placed it upon the canvas where he indicated. The flesh met a chill that was not mere cold, but the ghost of damp. "Oil, late set," he went on. "And yet—" He bent to the palette on the table, running a quick census of the dollops set there like a spectrum, the cadmiums, the earths, the lakes. "Our vermilion on the palette is skimmed at the edges," he said. "Worked this afternoon, perhaps earlier. The stroke on the canvas is not of the same body. Look at the granulation. There is coarser matter in it, pumice, as at the door, consistent with a knife wiped after scraping a palette." He glanced to a nearby jar, labelled in a neat hand, pumice. "Armitage polishes his grounds with this. Useful for texture. More useful to a man in a hurry to make wet paint appear older than it is. You smear, then dust. It creases and dulls. A crude deceit." Lestrade bristled. "And what of it? He had a reason to make that horrid mark look what? Older?" Holmes's face had become very smooth. "I have learned to fear that look as much as any man's anger. To make it appear part of the evening's work, rather than an afterthought, Inspector. A painter of rules, we are told. Yet the stroke is theatrical, foreign to the hand that made this face, which is delicate and slow. The incongruity is as loud as a trumpet. The body, covered now with a sheet, lay on the floor, where I suppose it had first been found. Holmes knelt, lifted the cloth, and for a brief instant the poor young features looked up at him, serene in that indifferent composure which follows violence. The cut was clean, horizontal, not deep enough to sever completely, enough to take a life by the dreadful economy of air and artery. Holmes's fingers did not quite touch the skin. He hovered, tracing the air. He sniffed once, briefly. Blood, oil of spike from the studio lamp, and, yes, bitter almonds. The latter does not emanate from the wound. "From the room, then," said Lestrade. "From a person," Holmes corrected. He replaced the sheet, rose, and turned his attention to a leather reticule hung upon the sitter's chair. From it he extracted a small silver vinaigrette, a handkerchief with a discreet E.M. stitched in one corner, and a card case that held a single visiting card. Miss Evelina March, Marchmont House, Grosvenor Gate. The vinaigrette he uncapped, and even at arm's length I caught a whisper of something sharp and artificial competing with rose attar. "Smell, Watson," I obeyed and started. "Not ammonia," I said, "nor hartshorn. There is a sweet, choking note, almonds again, but tinctured, not natural." Prussic preparations are occasionally and very foolishly used by certain modistes to freshen flowers or lace, Holmes said. "A drop here and there to brighten silk. I have encountered it twice, a dangerous vanity. If Miss March carried such a scent, the odour would cling to her gloves and to any cloth that touched her." Lestrade was unimpressed. "Or the painter dabbed it about to muddle us." "Possibly," said Holmes. "But consider, were you so minded, would you trumpet your trick by choosing the one smell every penny dreadful ties to poison? No, the odour is incidental and therefore valuable." He paced from hearth to door and back again, reading the room as a man reads a proof sheet, with swift stabs of eye and mind. At the mantel he paused, and with a folded paper lifted a small object. From the fender, a charred scrap the size of a postage stamp. He blew upon it, and a blackened fragment curled open to show a dot of metallic glitter. "Gold leaf," he said softly. "Burnt. Why should a portraitist be burning gold leaf at his hearth? He gilds frames, perhaps, but there is no frame in process, and his leaf would be kept flat, not crumpled and tossed." He glanced at the clock on the mantel. Its hands stopped at 22 minutes past 9. He did not trust it. He never does. He turned instead to the lamp upon the side table. Its chimney bore a crescent of soot high up, as if the flame had been turned ragged and high, and then lowered sharply. He touched the glass. "Warm yet, though the fire is almost out. We are not far behind the last act." The door opened to admit a thick-set foreign fellow in a workman's coat, guarded by a constable. His eyes flicked from Holmes to me, and then down, with that quick abasement of servants who have lately been accused. "Ruprecht," said Lestrade, "we've had our talk. Mr. Holmes may have his turn." Holmes's mildness is a more precise instrument than any scalpel. "Herr Ruprecht, you were dismissed at 7? The man's English was careful. "Yes, sir. Mr. Armitage told me I may go. He wished to work alone. I filled the lamps and left." "You filled them with oil of spike?" "With colza oil, sir. The oil of spike is for thinning paint, not lamps." Ruprecht's gaze shifted uneasily. "I did not touch the paints." "You touched the skylight?" "No, sir." "You burn leaf at the hearth?" "No, sir. Mr. Armitage hates disorder. He would not allow it." "Did Miss March return after you left?" The man's mouth compressed. "I do not know, but the bell for the street door, it rings twice. Quick, quick, when the outer door is held open and shut fast. I heard it as I turned into Maiden Lane. 2 rings, quick, quick." "At what time?" "Perhaps 10 minutes after 7, sir." Lestrade interposed. "Neighbours hear bells all the time." "Quite," said Holmes. "And yet a servant's ear for his master's bell is keener than a neighbour's. Thank you, Herr Ruprecht." When the man had been led away, Holmes stood with his hands deep in his pockets, his chin sunk. He seemed to withdraw from us, to become a thing of angles and calculations. Then he started and spoke in that quick undertone he uses when his mind has laid hold of some thread. "Inspector, you will oblige me by sending at once for Sir Saul Dilke. Have him here in this room within the hour, if you can contrive it. Also, do not, on any account, allow Mr. Armitage to be interviewed by anyone save his counsel. He's not a fool. He may become one if left alone with officious sympathy." Lestrade grunted. "And you, Mr. Holmes, What conjuring trick will you work meanwhile?" Holmes's eyes went to the portrait, where the red stroke lay like a shout across the lady's throat, and then to the chair with the reticule, and finally up to the skylight's iron grin. "No conjuring," he said, "only arrangement. The facts are here, only their order is amiss. We shall set them to rights." As we stepped back into the corridor to give Lestrade his orders, Holmes touched my sleeve and spoke so low that I barely caught it over the murmur of the idlers beyond the seal. "You observed the necklace on the canvas, Watson?" "Yes, pearls with a small gold cross, if I am not mistaken." "Quite so. The body wore none. Either Mr. Armitage painted what was not there, or someone took what was. In either case, our murderer has an appetite more particular than blood. Let us discover whose." Holmes remained very still for a long moment after his remark about the missing necklace, his eyes fixed upon the portrait as if the canvas itself were whispering its secrets. The faint lamplight of the studio trembled against the varnish, and in that wavering glow his lean profile looked cut from stone. I had learned by experience that when he fell into this statuesque silence, it was unwise to speak. His mind was assembling the fragments of the puzzle with a precision that brooked no interruption. At last he stirred, his voice measured and low. "Watson, it is the painter's hand that interests me most. You see, the face is rendered with calm precision, yet the stroke across the throat is almost violent. This was not born of artistry, but of agitation or desperation. A man who paints murder may be revealing more than the crime." He turned to Lestrade, who had returned to the doorway after issuing his orders. "You said Sir Saul Dilke will be here shortly?" "Aye," said the inspector, checking his watch. "He was at his club, but promised to come straight. Not that it'll change much, Mr. Holmes. The evidence is stacked high enough to paint Mr. Armitage black as midnight." Holmes gave a thin smile. "You forget, Inspector, that midnight and ink share a colour but not a nature. One obscures, the other preserves." Lestrade frowned at this, muttered something about word tricks, and retreated to the corridor. Holmes crouched once more by the hearth and brushed the ash gently with the back of his hand. Beneath the grey layer lay a fine, almost invisible trace of blue powder, ground as delicately as sugar. He gathered a pinch between finger and thumb and held it to the light. "Cobalt," he murmured, "the base for smalt, a pigment of singular brilliance. But observe the inconsistency. There is no cobalt blue upon the palette, nor upon any canvas in this room. What was mixed here that has since been burned?" I watched him scoop the remains into a small envelope from his pocketbook. "Holmes, you think something was destroyed after the crime?" "Not after, Watson. During. There are moments when an artist destroys his own work, not out of shame, but to conceal something that should never have been seen. What that something is, I mean to learn." Before I could question him further, the sound of carriage wheels on the wet stones announced the arrival of Sir Saul Dilke. He entered the studio with the air of a man accustomed to command, broad-shouldered, with a beard as stiff as wire and eyes like polished coal. His heavy rings flashed as he removed his gloves and fixed Lestrade with an expression of grim impatience. "Well, Inspector," he barked, "I was told my ward's death was beyond dispute, but I'm damned if I'll be kept waiting for explanations. Where is Armitage? What has he confessed?" "Mr. Armitage has said little, Sir Saul," Lestrade replied. "We're holding him pending further investigation. Mr. Holmes here is—" "I know who he is," interrupted Sir Saul, his tone cold as the fog outside. "I've read the papers. The magician of Baker Street, eh? If you can conjure my ward back to life, sir, I'll pay your fee. Otherwise, spare me your tricks." Holmes regarded him mildly, as though insult were a minor inconvenience. "I ask no payment, Sir Saul, save your patience. You were close to Miss March?" The man's expression faltered for the briefest instant. "Close? I was her guardian. I raised her after her father died in Calcutta. She was to inherit a considerable sum at her marriage, provided it met with my approval." "And did you approve of her attachment to Mr. Armitage?" Holmes asked. "Approve?" Sir Saul's voice hardened. "I forbade it. Armitage is talented, yes, but reckless. Spends money faster than his paint's dry. She was infatuated with him, and I warned her she'd find herself ruined. The engagement was a child's folly, and I told her so." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And yet she continued to sit for him?" "Yes," said Sir Saul grimly, "against my better judgment. I believed the sittings harmless, supervised. God knows what devil's hour she went there alone." Holmes tilted his head. "You sent her back to the studio last night, did you not?" The question struck the man like a blow. "I did," he said slowly. "She left her reticule. I thought it unwise for her to return, but she insisted. She was a determined girl. I watched her carriage turn down Henrietta Street myself." "And she did not return home?" Sir Saul's voice dropped to a near whisper. "No. When the police came, I knew." Holmes's gaze softened, but only slightly. "One last question. Did Miss March possess a necklace? Pearls with a small gold cross?" The big man hesitated. "Yes, a family heirloom. I gave it to her upon her 21st birthday. Why?" "It is absent," Holmes said simply. "From her person, but not from her portrait." For a moment, Sir Saul's mask of composure slipped. His eyes flicked to the canvas, and I saw the knuckles whiten upon his gloves. "Then that wretch Armitage took it." "Another proof of his guilt. He painted it to mock me, to flaunt what he'd stolen." Holmes made no reply, but his gaze lingered on Sir Saul for a heartbeat longer than was polite. "I thank you, Sir Saul. That will be all for now. Inspector, if you would be so kind as to escort our visitor back to his carriage." Lestrade, sensing something in Holmes's tone, obeyed without protest. As the heavy door closed behind them, Holmes crossed the room in quick strides, seized the poker, and rapped it lightly upon the panel of the doorframe. A faint, hollow note answered him. He smiled. "Do you hear that, Watson? A false back, new timber painted to match, but the echo betrays it." He knelt, pressed his fingers into the edge where the skirting met the floor, and with a sudden push, a narrow section of panelling sprang free, revealing a shallow recess barely large enough to hold a flat object. Within lay a single sheet of canvas, rolled tightly and secured with string. Holmes untied it and spread it upon the table. It was a half-finished painting, a woman's face, strikingly similar to Miss March's, but older, harder, the features more severe. The brushwork was bold, assured, the colours recent. Yet what arrested us both was the expression, a mixture of fear and fury, as though the subject had been caught mid-protest. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I breathed. "Who is she?" Holmes traced a finger along the edge of the canvas. "I do not know yet. But I would wager that this woman holds the key to both lives, the one lost and the one about to be ruined." At that instant, Lestrade returned, his brow damp from the fog. "Sir Saul's gone," he said shortly. "Says he'll be at his club if we need him. What have you there?" Holmes rolled the painting once more, his expression unreadable. "A ghost, Inspector, one that may yet speak louder than the living." He replaced the panel, brushed his coat, and took up his hat. "Come, Watson, I should like a word with Lady Lydia before the night grows older. Something tells me this studio's most interesting work was not on the easel, but in the hearts of those who stood before it." And as we stepped out into the damp murk of Henrietta Street, I could not shake the feeling that the true portrait Holmes meant to uncover was not painted in oils at all, but in deceit, jealousy, and the crimson stroke of human folly. We found Lady Lydia precisely where Holmes had bidden her remain, in the dim comfort of our sitting room, her gloved hands motionless upon her lap, as if one too sudden movement might shiver the fragile poise she had achieved. The clock had gone a cautious 5 minutes beyond the hour. The lamps cast mellow islands of light. Our coals sent up a steady glow. Mrs. Hudson, by some feminine divination, had left a tray and vanished. Holmes closed the door softly and did not at once speak. He stood upon the hearthrug, head bent, the picture frames on our mantel, bright in the firelight like a row of tidy sentries. At last he lifted his gaze to our visitor. "Lady Lydia, I require truth in the plainest possible dress. You have looked into many closets today, and expected to find ghosts. We have found one. Tell me, do you know a woman whose face resembles Miss Evelina March's, but older, sterner in the mouth, with the same set to the eyes?" Her composure fractured. A tremor passed through her. "Then you have seen it," she whispered. "Lucian painted her." "Who is she?" "Her name, her public name, is Aurelia Vane," Lady Lydia replied, each word chosen with care. "A contralto of some repute 10 years ago, a beauty of more repute than was good for her. In private she was, Evelina's mother's sister." "The aunt," Holmes said very softly. "Yes. Evelina adored her as a child. Sir Saul forbade the acquaintance when Evelina came to live at Marchmont House. He called Madame Vane dangerous company and would have none of it. But last winter Aurelia appeared here again, thin and desperate. She sent for me, not Evelina. She begged that I intercede with Sir Saul for a small allowance. He refused. Lucian met her afterward by chance at the academy, and the old connection quickened. He asked to paint her. "A study in survival," he called it. Lady Lydia's eyes flicked to Holmes. "I did not like it. She was not good for him." Holmes's fingers steepled. "Goodness is an elastic measure. What of money?" "I gave her what I could," she said, colour rising. "Do not mistake me, Mr. Holmes. This is not charity I am ashamed of. But I would not have Evelina mixed in it. I believed the affair finished until 3 nights ago Aurelia sent me a note, wild with fear. She wrote that a little cross would be the ruin of them all if it were not returned. I sent to her lodging in Mead Street. The landlady said she had not slept there for a week." "The little cross," Holmes repeated. "Pearls and a gold pendant. Family property. Was Aurelia ever its owner?" "No, it was Evelina's," Lady Lydia said. "But Aurelia coveted it. There was some childish quarrel between them when Evelina was barely 16. I thought it long past." Holmes crossed to the escritoire and drew a sheet of paper toward him. "Watson, a line to Lestrade. Ask him to send a man to Mead Street to confirm Madame Vane's absence and to post a constable there against her return." He turned back to Lady Lydia. "What did Sir Saul fear in Aurelia?" "The past," she said simply. "He made Evelina's fortune in steel, but his own youth was not of iron. He hates debts that cannot be bought off. Aurelia knows things, she always did." Holmes's face, which had been intent, flattened to its mask. "You are saving me steps, Lady Lydia. For that I am obliged. Another matter? You wore Parma violet earlier. Now there is, beneath it, a thread of bitter almond. Have you handled Evelina's lace of late?" Her breath caught. "This afternoon at the mortuary I straightened it. I could not bear that she should lie untidy before strangers." "You do her honour," Holmes said, with that grave courtesy which in him is rarer than wit. You also confirm that the odour clings where it touches. Good. He took up his hat. Watson, we shall pay a brief call at Marchmont House. If Sir Saul is still at his club, so much the better. Lady Lydia, you have been brave among men. Be braver still among women. Go to Meard Street yourself at first light. A gentle hand may coax what a constable cannot. Send word by any urchin to Baker Street of what you learn. She rose. You think Aurelia holds the necklace? I think, said Holmes, that someone moved quickly to remove an incriminating trifle that would, to the right eyes, speak paragraphs. Whether that someone was Aurelia Vane, Lucian Armitage, or a third hand is what we shall presently test. We left her with the brandy untasted and took a hansom east through streets where the fog had thinned to gauze and the lamps burned like moons behind it. Marchmont House stood aloof behind a sweep of iron railings, its windows blind. A single light burned above the servants' entrance. Holmes rang, and in due course a maid admitted us with the wary civility of a house stricken by catastrophe. "Mrs. Dalrymple," Holmes said at once, as if the name were written on her cap. "We desire a word with Miss March's maid. You are not she." "No, sir," said the housekeeper, startled into truth. "That would be Alice Grimble, but she's near useless with grief." "Then we shall be gentle," Holmes returned, and in another minute we were in a small sewing-room where a slight girl sat, a length of black crape in her lap, her eyes swollen to bruises. Holmes did not waste words. "Alice, tell me about the pearls and the little cross." Her fingers clutched the crape. "She never took it off, sir. Never. Save for sittings, because Mr. Armitage would say it caught too much light and he'd paint it after. She kept it in the reticule." The girl swallowed. "Only yesterday afternoon she came home flustered-like and said as how she'd lost it. Then later she found it again and laughed at me for fretting. She said someone had played a trick and put it back." Holmes's head came up. "Put it back where?" "In the reticule, sir." "She showed me." "It lay in the small pocket with the vinaigrette." "Who had access to the reticule that afternoon?" Alice's eyes moved, memory dragging its net. "Only me, Sir Saul. He'd asked to see the visiting cards, and Mrs. Clymer, as brought a new bonnet from Madame Vane's." "Oh." "From whose house?" Holmes asked, though he knew. "Madame Vane's rooms, sir. She keeps a little showroom in St. Martin's Lane under another name. Mrs. Clymer said as much. She'd come with lace and a bonnet. Miss Evelina was merry over it, said as how it made her look like a French picture." The girl's mouth crumpled. "She was that kind, sir?" Holmes laid a sovereign on the table and rose. "You have helped your mistress. Remember this. Grief is not improved by questions. Send any boy with a message should the bonnet woman return." In the hall, Holmes paused by a console where, among cards on a silver tray, lay a half-torn theatre bill printed on thick paper and edged with gilt. He touched its browned corner. "Gold leaf on cheap stock," he murmured for my ear. "Aurelia Vane sang a benefit last week. The printer gilds his headings." He slipped the fragment beneath his cuff. "Our hearth ashes are learning to speak." We had reached the door when a footfall pounded the flagged court, and the door burst wide to admit Sir Saul himself, coat flung back, temper blazing. He checked upon seeing us and forced his voice to a lower register. "Mr. Holmes, what the devil are you about in my house at this hour?" "Teaching your servants to remember," Holmes answered placidly. "And you, Sir Saul, to forget your anger for a moment. It fogs the glass through which you must look if you are to see your way." Sir Saul's hand slammed against the newel. The force of it made the stair rod ring. "I'll not be lectured. My ward is dead, my name in every mouth in London, and the man who killed her sits out of my reach. If there is a necklace missing, I will pay for 20, If there is an aunt meddling, I will clap her in jail for extortion, but do not stand in my hall and tell me what I must forget." Holmes regarded him with an odd compassion that did not touch his voice. "Then permit me to tell you what you must remember. You sent Miss March back to Henrietta Street. You knew she was determined. You also knew, because you are not a fool, that there were other forces about her stronger than a guardian's displeasure. If you would aid justice, answer me this without heat. Did you, yesterday afternoon, handle Miss March's reticule?" Sir Saul's jaw set. "I looked for a card I had given her to carry to a Mr. Child, the framer. I found it. That is all." "And found, perhaps put back, nothing else?" "Nothing." He opened the door as if to sweep us from his path. "If you have finished your catechism?" "For the moment," Holmes said. "But tomorrow morning you will go to St. Martin's Lane and pay a call upon a bonnet-room that is and is not Madame Vane's. You will do so because a woman there knows which pocket holds a young lady's jewels, and because she or the hand behind her placed a thing in, and after took it out. Should you fail me, I shall bring you there under warrant as a witness, inconveniently late." The big man stared, then gave a rough, unwilling nod. "Why, you drive a hard bargain, Mr. Holmes." "I transact only in facts," Holmes returned. "Good night." In the cab, the city slipping past like a series of half-remembered dreams, he at last leaned back and let his eyes close. "We are within a finger's breadth, Watson," he said, almost to himself. "Someone rehearsed last night, set properties, altered the scene, painted a wound, and struck a real one to match. But they blundered at a small point. They could imitate age on paint with pumice. They could stifle time on a clock. They could burn what told tales in the grate. They forgot that a scent clings, and that a likeness, once painted, may be hidden, but not unmade. And our next step? He opened his eyes, and in them the glitter had sharpened to steel. At first light, I will pay a call on a printer who gilds his bills, on a bonnet room that answers to 2 names, and on a locksmith who fitted a false panel in Henrietta Street. Meanwhile, I shall send a note to the cells. Mr. Armitage must be told to eat, to sleep, and above all, to say nothing. When the trap is sprung, I prefer my birds alive. At dawn we were in the street, the grey of London not so much light as the withdrawal of darkness. Holmes's temper ran cool and keen. He broke his fast with coffee and a heel of bread, as a soldier sharpens a blade without ceremony. By 8:30 we had turned into Chandos Street, where a modest printer's window exhibited benefit bills and ball programmes whose cheap paper strove for grandeur with flourishes of type and smears of gilt. Within, the air smelt of ink and dust and a faint metallic sweetness. A thin man with printer's black under his nails looked up from a forme he was locking. "You put gold on your headings," Holmes remarked pleasantly, passing a forefinger over a sample so that a fleck of leaf came away and clung to his skin. "Not all do. The fashion is yours." "'Tis not fashion, sir. 'Tis custom when the customer insists," said the printer, wary but not unfriendly. "Leaf's dear and slow. Most are content with yellow ink." Holmes laid upon the counter the browned corner we had found on Marchmont House's tray. "Your stock and cut?" The fellow peered, nodded. "My board, right enough. I trimmed that very run last week. Aurelia Vane, a singer what had a benefit at the Argyle Rooms. Her agent paid for gilt. Shame, for the house was only half. I had bundles left." "And who collected the surplus?" Holmes asked. The printer scratched his temple. "A gentleman, well-dressed, heavy rings, black beard with a streak of iron. Said Miss Vane wanted to keep 'em for friends and patrons." Holmes's eyes flickered the smallest degree. "Sir Saul Dilke. If that's his name. said the printer, vaguely. He paid prompt, in notes, came again 2 days after, inquiring if any had come to ask for more. I told him no. Holmes smiled his schoolroom smile. You are a precise man. For that the police will thank you. One last point. Who else last week ordered leaf? No one, save a framer, Child and Barker, down towards Bedford Street. They'll leave a slip on a frame, presented by, that sort of thing. They'll have used smalt too for an underblue. It bites better under gold. Cobalt and gold, murmured Holmes, with the air of a man checking a column he had totted up last night. My thanks. Outside, he slipped the fragment away. We might have guessed Sir Saul would gather the leavings of his protégé's applause to warm his pockets. But it is the second visit that interests me. He came to see if someone else had been to gather them too. Someone who knew there was a value in a gilt bill beyond sentiment, namely, that it sheds when burnt and confesses where it has been. We did not linger. St. Martin's Lane received us with a bustle of trades and the ceaseless cry of carts. A narrow door between a carver and a milliner bore the modest legend, Mrs. Blythe's bonnets and laces. The bell tinkled as we entered. A plump woman with a shrewd mouth emerged from behind a curtain, and the room exhaled that frail paradise of ribbon, straw, and starch that lives in female shops. Holmes's bow here had an extra inch of civility. Mrs. Blythe, a lady of our acquaintance, was yesterday favoured with your goods, a bonnet and certain lace. We seek the hand that selected them. Many hands handle my wares, sir, she returned, prepared to be offended if that should prove profitable. Fewer arrange them at Marchmont House, Holmes said mildly, and with one gloved finger lifted a scrap from the counter, a tiny tube, corked and nearly empty, labelled in minuscule script, Essence d'Amande. A dangerous aid to freshness, this. I observed the same upon Miss March's lace. Pray do not use it upon the living again. Her colour drained and returned. I did not sell that to the young lady. A friend left it. Aurelia Vane, said Holmes, not as a question. And the friend sent Mrs. Clymer to Marchmont House with a bonnet. Mrs. Clymer had the run of Miss March's room. She knew her reticule and its pockets. Afterwards, he let the silence settle and then, quite gently, Mrs. Blythe, the police can be made to look here. Or I can look here, which is not the same thing. Tell me what you know of Madame Vane. The shrewd mouth twisted. She's a hard case, sir. Voice near gone, fortune quite. She shows lace for me upon occasion. She brings customers who like a whisper of daring with their ribbon. She owed me a trifle. Never mind that. Last week a gentleman came, beard, rings, promised to settle her account if I'd keep parcels for her and ask no questions. I asked none. When Mrs. Clymer goes abroad, it is to deliver what Madame marks. Yesterday morning there was a small velvet case wrapped in tissue. I could see the string of white within when the tissue slipped. Pearls, a little cross. Madame's note said, "Return to Miss M. reticule. Before 3. No delay." Who brought the case? Holmes's voice had fallen to a slice of sound. A foreign gentleman, civil tongue, German accent. He said Madame Vane was ill and urgent. He had a locksmith with him later, measuring my fitting-room door. Said Madame would pay to mend a catch. I thought it odd. Holmes's eyes had gone bright and small. "Ruprecht," he said for my ear alone. "To Mrs. Blythe, thank you. When Madame Vane next sends a message, you will oblige me by sending it instead to Baker Street, by the same hand, if you please. Here is my card. You have made a friend today." He left her richer by a promise, and us poorer by a sovereign, and we turned south again, past Child and Barker, where a foreman with gold on his thumb swore that a bearded gentleman had paid for a plate, to Miss E. March in admiration, never collected. Holmes only nodded, noting the blue smalt drying on a bench, and led me on to a lane behind Henrietta Street, where a brass plate proclaimed Those Foy Locksmith. Mr. Foy proved to be a chirruping little man with a fondness for his craft that verged on love. "Falsebacks?" he chuckled when Holmes described the panel. "Oh, the artists are as vain as thieves, always wanting a hidey-hole for a sketch that ain't paid for, or a flask as the missus don't approve. That panel was mine, right enough." "Neat, wasn't she?" "Very," Holmes said. "To the client?" Foy shuffled. "Cash job, customer gave the name Fisher. Big fellow?" "No, neat as a pin. Foreign, but not German, more the Paris sort. He had a silver-topped cane and a habit of breathing mint to hide tobacco. He wanted it urgent. 'This week or never,' says he. I did it the same day." "Alone?" Foy blinked. "No, his man was with him, a valet type. And there was a lady waiting in the cab, veil like a cloud." Holmes's mouth tightened. "Date?" 4 days passed. Outside, Holmes took 3 hasty steps and stopped dead, as if a string had jerked him. "Fisher is no name," he said. "It is a function, one who angles where waters are muddied. Paris, cane, mint. Those are the trappings of a certain theatre agent I have known on the fringe of better companies. He keeps singers alive upon small loans and large expectations. He would serve as go-between for a woman like Aurelia Vane and a man like, well, Sir Saul, I hazarded. Sir Saul buys debts with cheques. This fellow buys them with secrets. No, think subtler. Someone who needed the painting of Aurelia, hid where Armitage would not find it, yet close enough that it might be fetched in a moment. Someone who wished to frighten a girl with a trick of the necklace and then soothe her by returning it. Someone who moves comfortably among studios and servants. A gentleman's gentleman might do it. A singer's agent would advise it. Between them, they set the stage. We had scarce reached the corner when a messenger boy, cap askew and eyes alight with the pride of urgent tidings, skidded to a halt before us. "Mr. Holmes, message from Baker Street, sir. Lady says Madame Vane found." Holmes snapped the note open. Lady Lydia's neat hand leapt at us, Merd Street, upper back room. "Ill. Says she was not at Henrietta Street last night. Says she sent pearls back. Fears he has them again. Will not name him. Come at once." Holmes's hand closed on my arm. "Watson, we are upon the hour when a frightened woman will half confess the second half is in peril of being silenced. To Merd Street. We made that poor street in minutes that felt longer than their number. A sour-faced landlady jerked her head for us to mount, and we climbed to a room where light struggled past a rag of curtain. On the truckle bed lay a woman whose beauty was the ghost of itself. Cheekbones too sharp, eyes too wide, lips reddened by habit rather than health. Yet when she saw Holmes, she managed a smile that had once conquered galleries. "You are late, Mr. Holmes," she murmured. "But perhaps in time." "In time for what, madame?" "For a confession or a funeral," she said, with a small, weary laugh. "I do not yet know which is mine." Holmes drew a chair to the bed and took her pulse with a touch as gentle as any physician's. His eyes flicked to the washstand, where a glass stood half full and a little phial lay on its side, its cork misfitted. He bent, smelt, and carried the glass to the window. "Watson?" I followed, and the sweet, choking ghost of almonds met me again, fainter but unmistakable. Holmes set the glass down untouched. "You will not drink that again, Madame Vane," he said very quietly. "And you will tell me, without coyness and without pride, the name you wrote as he. For if you do not, I warn you that in an hour that door will open, and the man who owns the pronoun will come to cure you of your courage." Aurelia Vane's lashes fluttered at Holmes's warning, and for a heartbeat I thought she would laugh again, that brittle little sound which had once been music and was now defence. But something in his face, its absolute absence of pity, which with him is a higher form of kindness, broke her. She turned her head upon the thin pillow and spoke to the stained ceiling rather than to us. "He calls himself Fisher," she said. "He has other names. On the boulevard he was Victor. In Vienna he signed a bond as Pelissier. He lends to women what no bank will lend, time, and then he takes it back with interest. You cannot arrest a man for that." Holmes's eyes barely blinked. "I can, if his interest is paid in blood." "You sent the pearls back?" "I did." Her hand tightened upon the sheet with a strength that surprised me. "When Evelina came to me last week—" "Yes, she came. Sir Saul cannot keep a girl from a woman she loves better than any father. She was wild to be married, and poor Lucian near ruined. She thought the necklace might be pledged for a few days, only days, long enough to see the patron's payment through. I would not have it. I am not so fallen as that. I told her to leave it with me for an hour, and I would show her the ugliness of pawnbrokers, so that she would never think of it again. But he was there, waiting in the passage. He took it as a cat takes a bird." Her throat worked. "He said he would return it in time for her sitting, that the lesson would be learned by fright, not loss. I wrote that miserable note to Mrs. Blythe and sent the case after by his man. I thought it ended." "And then?" Holmes asked. "Then he came back. Not to me, he's not sentimental, to Sir Saul." Her voice became a whisper. "He has known Sir Saul for years. The gentleman who forbids sins is too often the man who knows where to find them. Fisher said there was an indiscretion to be hushed, a trifle, that he had prevented a theft of Miss March's jewels, that he had rendered a service. He asked for money. Sir Saul paid, but Fisher had seen Lucian's arrears, had smelled ruin. He saw an easier fortune. He told Sir Saul he could stop the marriage if he were allowed to arrange the scandal. Sir Saul told him to manage it and speak to him no more of details." Holmes did not move, but I felt the air in the room change, as if some pressure had eased its grip. "Madame," he said softly, "you have saved us hours and perhaps a life. Why the almonds?" She closed her eyes. "Because fear is fatiguing. He leaves it for me like a bouquet, and to calm the nerves. It does for a time. Then it does too much. Last night his man came with a bottle and told me to drink and sleep and be silent. I drank a sip. I am an old coward, Mr. Holmes, but not a fool. I poured the rest away and sent for the lady you trust, because I trust her too. I expected him at noon to ask if I had enjoyed my rest. "He will be early," Holmes said. "Watson, the glass on the washstand, throw it into the alley and bring me the jug from the scullery. Mrs. Hudson has taught me one or two domestic stratagems that our friend may regret." I obeyed. When I returned, Holmes had emptied the corked phial into his pocket-book and replaced it with a little measure from his own case. He shook the bottle, recorked it, and set it where it had lain. "A draught, harmless as rain-water," he observed. "But it will look its part. Now, madame, you will lie very still and pretend to sleep when our visitor arrives. If he believes you stubborn, he will be cautious. If he believes you pliant, he will reveal himself." She tried to smile and could not. "I can do that." Holmes drew the curtain wider so that the light fell across the bed, and seated himself on the chair's edge with the relaxed attitude of a relative keeping watch. I took a place behind the door, where a man entering would not at once see me. The landlady, properly primed by Holmes with the word "doctor," promised to admit no one but the expected apothecary with his restorative. We had not long to wait. A step came up the stair with the exact confidence of a man who has paid for confidence in others, and the door, after a murmur and a coin's chink below, opened upon as sleek a figure as I have seen outside a green room, a compact gentleman in a dark frock, hat carried not worn, gloves buttoned, a silver-topped cane in the crook of his arm, and that faint exhalation of mint which we had already been taught to expect. He stopped at sight of Holmes, swept him with a single cool glance, and bowed the thinnest possible degree. "I beg pardon. I was told Madame Vane was indisposed. I am her man of business." Holmes's eyelids drooped. He looked every inch the tired watcher with no appetite for quarrel. "You are just in time. She sleeps now after a draught the doctor left. If you will be very quiet, sir." "Of course," said the newcomer, setting his cane against the wall and moving with feline care to the bed. His eyes, for all their courtesy, were hungry. He took up the bottle on the stand, withdrew the cork and sniffed delicately. "Good. She will wake refreshed." "Presently," said Holmes, "and her refreshment will be yours if you are wise enough to be satisfied with it. Business will keep." The man's smile did not alter, but a shadow of impatience crossed it. He replaced the bottle, leaned, and looked closely at the sleeper. Whatever he sought to read there, capitulation perhaps or endurance, he seemed to be reassured. He turned, and as he did so his cuff slipped back a fraction. I saw, and so did Holmes, the narrow pale scar that looped the wrist, lighter than the skin, the sort a wire leaves when worn too tight. "An artist's model?" Holmes inquired, with a languor that deceived no one in the room but the man addressed. The gentleman glanced down, let the cuff fall, and made a tiny dismissing gesture. "An old accident. Sir, if you will permit me to leave a note, our friend must be reminded of an appointment." He took from his pocket a visiting card, plain, with only a name struck in small capitals, Fisher, and wrote upon it swiftly with a pencil. As he bent, his free hand strayed to the bedside table where the reticule might have lain in another house, another room. The gesture was automatic, a thief's muscle remembering. He checked it, smiled at his own reflex, and laid the card by the glass. Holmes rose. "The appointment is unnecessary, Mr. Pelissier. You will keep another with me in an hour." The writing hand stilled. The man did not look up at once. When he did, his eyes had lost their civility. "You are mistaken in me," he said softly. "I rarely am," Holmes returned. "You bought a locksmith's silence for a panel in Henrietta Street. You carried a velvet case to a bonnet room and reclaimed it again when panic proved more profitable than repentance. You arranged a petty drama with a necklace to frighten a girl, and then a grander one with a painted wound to ruin a man. There remains only the blade, but that too belongs to hands that work with line and edge. You keep such hands in your employ." The other man's gaze slid for the first time from Holmes to me, seeking numbers as cowards do. He found none to his liking and tried another weapon. "You are theatrical, sir. I am a tradesman. Tradesmen do not murder, they invoice." "You invoice for what you procure," said Holmes. "Last night you procured means and opportunity. Motive you sold to another." A silence fell then which seemed to me to last minutes, but could not have been more than heartbeats. The house itself held its breath. Down in the street a vendor cried onions and moved on. Fisher's right hand very little tightened. He was weighing his odds. I heard Holmes's voice, slow as ice forming. "If you lift that cane," he said, "you will find it heavier than you remember. The tip is leaded. Your instinct will be to strike and run. You will not reach the stair. My friend behind the door is a surgeon. He knows where to place a blow that postpones pain until the man is in irons." Fisher's hand fell away from the cane as if it had burned him. He gave a little bow that made mockery of surrender. "You have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Holmes, but you do not have me at a loss. I am expected elsewhere. A guardian grows impatient when his affairs are not expedited." "Indeed," said Holmes. "Take a message to him." The necklace was seen upon the painted throat because the living one would presently be bare. The gold leaf burned in the hearth because it had lain upon a bill your bearded patron carried. The smell of almonds clung where you would have called it perfume. And a sable hair at the skylight says the room was dressed by hands that know pictures better than windows. Tell him also that the man he meant to ruin ate bread this morning and will sleep tonight under a roof not called a prison, and that the next time we meet it will be in company he does not keep, magistrates." Fisher's face, for all its polish, twitched. "You talk too much, Mr. Holmes. One day a man will unstitch that clever mouth and find nothing inside but thread." He took up his cane with 2 fingers, as one handles an unclean thing, and moved to the door. At the threshold he paused. "Madame," he said to the sleeping woman, "I am sorry you are ill. Get well." Then he went down the stair so lightly that the boards scarcely cried. Holmes waited until the outer door closed. Then he drew the card from the table and turned it so that we both could read the penciled words. 3 o'clock, Henrietta Street, bring the cross. He folded the card and slipped it into his waistcoat. "We shall oblige him," he said, "but not as he intends. Watson, send a note to Lestrade, a net round Henrietta Street at 2:30, plain men among the crowd, constables out of sight. Admit Sir Saul, and no other. Ruprecht is to be fetched from his lodging. He will know a pair of hands when he sees them. As for Fisher, let him think the stage is his. We shall give him an audience." Aurelia opened her eyes then, the pretence no longer necessary. "You will not let him hurt her memory," she said. Holmes's expression altered by a hair's breadth. "No," he said. "Nor yours." "Courage a little longer, madame. The last act is set." Holmes's preparations, once conceived, were executed with that economy of motion which is his nearest approach to haste. By 1:45, we were again in Henrietta Street. The cordon had been drawn wide. Plain men sauntered with the indifference of loafers at a matinee. A barrow lingered at the corner with its onions, suddenly fascinated by art. A window opposite had acquired an old woman with knitting that never advanced a row. Lestrade, whose talents shine when properly arranged, had placed himself 2 doors down with a newspaper held at a scientific angle. Within the studio, the disorder left by death had been tidied to a simulacrum of working life. The easel stood where it had stood, the lamp had been trimmed, the hearth was clean, save for a single telling smear Holmes had contrived from the printer's leaf in Chandos Street, just enough glitter to remind a guilty eye of a careless hand. Upon the sitter's chair lay a reticule, Lady Lydia's, lent at Holmes's request, and in it a velvet case containing, not pearls, but a string of paste he had procured from Mrs. Blythe under a vow of innocent deception. "Truth," he observed as he adjusted the chair by a finger's breadth, "is less a substance than a relation. We must secure the relations, and the substance will present itself." He assigned our stations with the precision of a stage manager. Lestrade would enter only at a sign, a cough twice, and the door should fill with policemen as if the room had grown them. Ruprecht was to be allowed up at once and kept by the window. Holmes wished his eye upon hands rather than words. As for myself, I was to stand just within the shadow of the screen where a model changed, close enough to see, far enough to remain uncounted. We had perhaps 10 minutes quiet, if such a room can be said to know quiet where the very air remembers voices, when a hansom drew up briskly and a heavy tread mounted the stair. Sir Saul Dilke entered without knocking, his beard clipped of its disorder, his wrath trimmed and buttoned like his coat. He halted at sight of the easel and the covered shape upon the floor where the body had lain. "I was told to come," he said, in a voice he kept level by force. "I am here." "Why this theatre?" "Because those who made last night's theatre think in scenes," Holmes replied, and indicated the chair. "Pray, sit, Sir Saul. We shall all play our parts the straighter for comfort. You will presently be asked to receive back a jewel. I beg you, if you value justice, to let your temper sleep until it is done." He had barely spoken when another step, lighter and more exact, came behind Sir Saul's. The door opened to admit Fisher, urbane, composed, with a hint of haste written only in the gloss of his hair, and the breath scarcely drawn. He bowed to Sir Saul with the familiarity of a tradesman who knows the weight of his patron's purse, and to Holmes with the courtesy of a duellist acknowledging a blade. "Punctuality is the soul of business," he said. "Sir Saul, Mr. Holmes, Doctor." His eye moved, taking possession of the room. It alighted upon the reticule as a kestrel's upon a hedge. "You have it," he murmured, to no one in particular, and to us all. Holmes, who could be the most admirable of servants when he chose, took up the reticule and weighed it, as a butler weighs a silver claret jug before presenting it. "We have what was promised," he said. "Before you touch it, a word. There will be no more drafts for Madame Vane, no more errands by strange men to bonnet rooms, no more locksmiths employed upon artists' walls. If we are agreed upon that, you may satisfy yourself as to the contents." Fisher's smile thinned. "You are fond of prefaces, Mr. Holmes. They weary commerce. The thing, if you please." Holmes opened the reticule and set the case upon the table. Fisher's gloved fingers hovered, then descended with the delicacy of a man to whom theft is a matter of touch. In that instant, as the lid rose, I saw two other motions. Sir Saul's head jerked by a fraction, the way a mastiff's ear pricks at a footfall known too well, and across the room Ruprecht's hands clenched, then opened, as if remembering. Fisher's breath made the slightest sound, disappointment, amusement. It is hard to mark the difference in men of his trade. He did not betray himself so far as to bite the pearls. He only closed the case again, as one pockets a coin to be tested later, and turned his head toward Sir Saul. "As arranged," he said softly. "Your anxieties are ended." "Arranged?" Sir Saul's control strained. "You infernal—" Holmes's hand, without looking, made the smallest gesture, and Sir Saul swallowed the oath like a hot stone. "Your phrase is maladroit," Holmes observed to Fisher. "You should have said as promised or as pledged. Arranged is the vocabulary of a prompter." Fisher did not trouble to defend his diction. He slid the case into his inner pocket with that economical twist of the wrist I had seen pickpockets use in crowded omnibuses. "We are done," he said. "I wish you a good day." "Not quite," said Holmes. "You will stand where you are, Mr. Fisher, and lift your right hand so that our friend here may see your fingers. It is one of the oddities of guilt that it detests instruction on small points." Fisher's lip moved, whether to refuse or to sneer I could not tell, when a voice behind him, square and accented, spoke like an anvil struck. "Das ist die Hand," said Ruprecht, low and certain. "I know the grip. He scraped the palate with this hand. He wipes the knife so. See the first finger? Smalt under the nail." "Smalt?" Lestrade called from the corridor, unable to curb himself. "Blue," Holmes returned, pleasant as a tutor. "We found its ghost in the grate. Lift your hand, Mr. Fisher." For the first time, the man miscalculated. He flung his arm instead, not up but out, snatching for his cane. The movement was as quick as a fencer's lunge. He meant, I think, to smash the lamp and fling us into confusion. He had reckoned without Holmes's quiet prophecy. The leaded tip made the cane slower than memory, and before it could arc, Sir Saul, with a sound between a curse and a roar, seized Fisher by the collar and bore him back against the wall with a violence that jarred the frames upon it. "Arrangement!" Sir Saul spat. "You arranged my ward's death!" Holmes was there in a stride, his hand on Sir Saul's sleeve. "No more, Sir Saul. We take him for what he carries and what he is, not yet for what you fear." He coughed twice, clear and unhurried. The door filled with constables as though the fog itself had condensed into blue surge. Fisher did not struggle further. A man of commerce knows when a market is closed. He stood, hair immaculate, tie true, eyes lively with calculation, and watched as Lestrade relieved him of the cane, the inner pocket case, and from a waistcoat slit, too neat to be amateur work, a slip of paper folded small. Lestrade tipped the case to Holmes, who opened it, not carelessly, for he treats even sham with respect, and let the pearls coil upon his palm. "Paste," he said, "beautifully matched, but paste. It was never the jewels you valued, Mr. Fisher, but the leverage. You return a toy to earn a debt. Then you call in the debt with compound cruelty." Fisher's smile, oddly, became genuine. "You should have been a banker, Mr. Holmes. The heart for it you lack, but not the head." "And you," Holmes said, "should have been an artist. You have a gift for composition and an eye for focus. Both have betrayed you. You allowed the wrong thing to glitter." He handed the pearls to Lestrade and unfolded the paper. On it was written in a clerkly hand, "Tuesday, 9:30, window latch, paint stroke after, knife below hearth, Sir S. to discover." Sir Saul made a sound like a man struck without warning. The knuckles went white upon his stick. "That is not my hand," he said hoarsely. "I never—" "It is not," Holmes agreed. "It is a memorandum to yourself, Mr. Fisher, in the hand of your valet or some hired pen, a schedule of your theatre. Sir S. to discover, not to do. You sold him an accident the way you sell an aria, already orchestrated. He paid not to be implicated by ignorance. You promised him ignorance. You delivered murder." Fisher's eyes flicked, sharp as a kingfisher's, toward the hearth. Holmes's gaze followed, then returned. "Remove him," Holmes said very quietly. As they took hold of the man, he turned with a silkiness that might have suited a drawing-room. "You will find, Inspector, that I was nowhere at 9:30, he said. "Inquiries at the Argyle rooms will tell you I applauded a contralto until 10. That is called an alibi. It is the currency of my profession." "We shall test it for counterfeit," Lestrade answered, not without satisfaction. "Out you go." In the aftermath, there was a silence so complete that the ticking of the stopped clock on the mantel, though it had no life in it, seemed almost audible. Sir Saul had turned away and stood by the window, his shoulders heaving once, only once, like a machine checked and set again. Holmes regarded him with a steadiness that did not accuse. "You see now, Sir Saul," he said, "why I bade you hold your temper. You were meant to supply it where proof failed. Had you struck him senseless, we should have tried a murder with passion as its headpiece and found ourselves at sea when the calm returned." Sir Saul faced him slowly. The rage had drained, leaving a large, tired man with the ruin of pride upon him. "What have I bought, Mr. Holmes?" he asked, low. "Tell me plain. I paid that scoundrel to stop a marriage. Have I paid by ignorance for a grave?" Holmes's reply was as grave. "You have paid for a play in which you did not read the last act. Whether the actor who took the knife did so at your word or at another's remains to be learned. You did not hire a murderer, Sir Saul. You hired a coward. Cowards breed worse men behind them." Ruprecht, who had watched the scene with the stillness of an image, spoke then with a craftsman's precision. "Mr. Holmes, the knife, if it was below the hearth—" "Just so," Holmes said, and crossed to the fender. He knelt, pressed the bar aside, and reached into the narrow void where ash gathers in old grates. His fingers, long and sensitive, fished a moment, and then came up with a small parcel wrapped in oiled paper. He unfolded it to reveal a palette knife, not large, its edge cleaned, its shank showing a discoloration that no man with a brush would mistake. Ruprecht sucked his breath. Holmes laid the knife flat upon a sheet and pointed with a pencil. "Note the burr where a careless hand scraped not paint but wood, the panel itself. Our man has habits. He cleans fast, wipes on pumice, hides in heat. Mr. Fisher sets the stage. Someone else paints and cuts upon it." He rose, and his eyes suddenly were far away, travelling along a thread only he could see. "We have taken the prompter. We have yet to unmask the player. He is a hand that knows pictures, a wrist that knows how to make a line and to end it. He is not Lucian Armitage, whose art is patient and whose panic is theatrical. He is a man accustomed to obedience. He will come when called." "Called how?" I asked. Holmes looked at the portrait, the cool young face, the cruel red across the throat, and very gently turned the easel toward the light. "By giving him back his picture," he said. "Tonight we shall hang the half-finished likeness from the false panel upon the very hook he chose for it, and then we shall wait." The day drew down grey and uneasy, a mist creeping from the river, as if the Thames itself had taken an interest in the affair. Holmes had the studio arranged to its former deception, every lamp, every brush, every streak of false disorder restored with that immaculate precision which in him resembled reverence. Even the unfinished portrait of Aurelia Vane had been fetched from its hiding-place and hung upon the concealed panel, its half-painted eyes turned toward the easel where Evelina's likeness presided, as though one woman silently accused the other. "You understand, Watson," he murmured as we worked. "The success of a trap depends less upon the bait than the illusion of safety. Our quarry will not come if he suspects his own stage has been altered. He must find everything as he left it, the painted wound, the silence, the guiltless canvas watching him from the wall. I knew better than to question him. The reasoning was sound, though it chilled me. I could not look upon that spectral studio, restored as if murder had not walked it, without feeling some grim presence standing just beyond the lamplight. When the last touch was set, Holmes extinguished one of the lamps, leaving a pool of brightness in the centre of the room and a shroud of shadow about the rest. "A theatre requires its darkness," he said, half to himself. Then he went to the window and parted the curtain by a hair's breadth. "Lestrade's men are in place. Fisher will not return, he has too fine a sense of self-preservation, but the hand that obeyed him will. The true murderer, Watson, is compelled by habit. He will come to tidy his work. Observe and keep your pistol ready, but use it only if my life or another's hangs by a thread." The hours that followed were long and heavy. Somewhere below, a cart rolled by with the muffled jangle of harness. The fog pressed itself upon the panes like a cold palm. Holmes remained motionless at the easel, his head bent as though he studied the crimson stroke upon the portrait. I waited in the shadow near the false panel, listening to the clock of St. Paul's strike the quarters. It was near midnight when a sound, a cautious click at the door, broke the silence. Holmes's figure did not stir. A moment later the latch turned and the door opened an inch. A draught breathed in, curling the lamplight. Then, with slow deliberation, the figure of a tea man slipped inside and closed the door behind him. He moved like one who knows every inch of the room. His feet avoided the loose board near the hearth. His hand reached without fumbling for the lamp key and shaded the flame with his body. In the partial glow, I saw the lean outline of the German servant, Ruprecht. His face, strained and sharp in the half-light, bore none of the dull submission he had shown at the station house. There was purpose in his eyes now, a dreadful composure that bespoke not fear, but duty. He went first to the easel, gazing upon the portrait as if confirming some private horror. Then, with a sudden gesture, he crossed to the hearth, knelt, and pried with a small chisel at the bricks where Holmes had found the knife. His breath came in short bursts, his lips muttering words too low for sense. At last he drew out something wrapped in dark cloth. Holmes's voice, calm and terrible, filled the room. "You will find the tool cleaner than you left it, Ruprecht. I took the liberty." The man sprang to his feet, the parcel clutched against his chest. His eyes darted toward the door, but Lestrade's silhouette filled the glass of the fanlight above it. Holmes stepped forward into the lamplight, his revolver drawn, but lowered. "You might save yourself effort by laying it on the table," he said. "Violence will serve no purpose. Your patron is already in custody." Ruprecht's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed to whisper, "He is no patron of mine. He made me a liar. He said it was only to frighten, to ruin the Englishman. Then he said the girl must die, for she had seen the wrong paper." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "You speak now because you think confession will soften the rope. It may, if you are precise. Tell us what was done and by whom." The man sank into the nearest chair as if his legs had deserted him. "I loved her," he said, and his accent thickened under the strain. "Miss March. She was kind. She spoke to me as to a man, not a machine. I could not bear that he should use her so." He buried his face in his hands. "Fisher said it was arranged, only a quarrel, a scandal. I was to fasten the skylight after to make it seem locked. But when I came, she was already dead, and he stood over her with the knife. He said if I spoke I would hang beside her lover. He made me clean, hide, burn. I did what he told me, like a coward, yes." "Fisher struck the blow then," Holmes said quietly. Ruprecht shook his head violently. "No, another. The man who owed Fisher money, the one who feared Sir Saul. He came in fury. He said Armitage must pay or be destroyed. They quarrelled," she cried out. "He struck in madness. Then Fisher came and told me what to do." Holmes's eyes flashed. "The man who owed Fisher money? Do you mean Lucien Armitage himself?" "Yes." The word broke from him like a sob. He did not mean it. She was between them. He tried to take the paper. She held it, and the knife. He made a helpless gesture. He thought I fainted. It was I who knew she was dead. There was a long silence. I heard Lestrade's sharp intake of breath, the creak of the constable's boot behind the door. Holmes did not move. When he spoke, his voice had the weight of a verdict already written. "You have told the truth in pieces, Ruprecht. I do not yet know whether it is the whole. You will come with us now to the yard, and there you shall tell it again under oath. Mr. Armitage shall be confronted with your story and the knife you kept. Then we shall see whether remorse can paint itself upon a living face as vividly as guilt has been painted upon the dead." As Lestrade's men took the servant by the arms, he turned a stricken gaze toward the portrait on the easel. "She smiled while he painted," he said hoarsely. "She said the colour made her alive. It was the colour of her death." Holmes replaced the cloth upon the blade and watched them lead the man away. When the door had closed, he stood for a long while, the lamplight painting sharp planes across his face. "Watson," he said at last, "our friend Lestrade will think the case concluded, but there remains a shadow too long for one man to cast. Ruprecht is guilty of concealment, yes, Armitage of passion, Fisher of manipulation. But behind them all, there is still the motive Fisher served. He was never his own master. He was hired to stop a marriage, yes, but by whose will was that desire sharpened to murder?" He turned to the portrait again, his gaze tracing the cruel vermilion stroke that had started it all. "We are not yet at the end. Tomorrow we call upon Sir Saul Dilke once more. He knows what it is to purchase silence. Let us see what he will pay for truth." And as he extinguished the lamp, leaving the painted faces to fade into the gloom, I felt that the real murderer, the one whose design had made pawns of every soul in that cursed studio, was not yet far from the reach of Sherlock Holmes. Morning in Baker Street broke clear and cold, the fog swept aside by a sharp wind that glittered in the windows like shards of new glass. Holmes stood at the mantel, the ash from his overnight experiment scattered like grey snow upon the tiles, his thin form drawn taut with that peculiar stillness which with him always heralded movement. I had barely set down the breakfast tray before he turned, his eyes bright, his voice quick with that iron edge of certainty I had come to know too well. "Watson, the puzzle has simplified itself in the night. The servant's confession gave us the outline. Armitage struck, Fisher arranged, but neither held the pen that wrote the script. The final hand, my dear fellow, is the hand that paid for silence long before murder was ever committed. It is time Sir Saul Dilke explained what precisely he purchased." We left at once for Grosvenor Gate, the hansom's wheels humming through the morning's chill. Marchmont House stood gloomy and grand, its blinds drawn as if to hide its own conscience. The butler's face, grave as an undertaker's, betrayed no surprise at our arrival. "Sir Saul is within, Mr. Holmes," he said quietly. "He has been expecting you." We found the man in his study, the fire unlit, the air thick with the faint metallic scent of extinguished coal. He sat behind a massive desk of black walnut, his beard shadowing his mouth like the bars of a cage. He did not rise. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said, his tone measured but heavy, "you've come to tell me that my servant has turned informer and that my ward's murderer is found. Spare me the speech. Lestrade was here an hour ago." Holmes took the only chair opposite and folded his hands upon his knee. "Then you know that Armitage confessed the blow, though not the intent." Sir Saul's lips twitched. "Confession from a man half-mad with guilt means little. If he killed her, it was accident. But the shame is the same. The name of March is ruined, and Fisher, damn him, has sold me for 30 pieces of silver." Holmes regarded him with an expression almost kindly. 30 is an expensive sum for a lie, Sir Saul, but a cheap price for a secret. The question is, what secret?" For the first time, the great man's composure wavered. "You overstep yourself." "Not at all," Holmes said evenly. "I step exactly where your money walked before me. You hired Fisher, through the pretext of Madame Vane, to prevent Evelina's marriage. You feared disgrace, but not hers. Tell me, Sir Saul, what tie bound you to that young woman that could not bear the daylight?" The man's hands gripped the edge of the desk. "I was her guardian," he said through his teeth. "Guardianship is a legal fiction," Holmes replied. "I speak of blood. The resemblance between Miss March and Madame Vane is not coincidental. Their likeness was the first thread that caught my attention. You are not her guardian, Sir Saul. You are her father. A low sound escaped him, half snarl, half groan. He rose heavily, his shoulders filling the space like a bear rearing in its den. "By God, Holmes, if you repeat that—" Holmes's tone did not change. "It is already written in the canvas. Aurelia Vane was your mistress in her youth. The girl was born under another name, sent abroad, returned at your whim to a house that called her ward, not child. You feared the truth would surface through marriage, that the name of Dilker would stand disgraced. So you bought Fisher's silence, thinking money could bind what conscience could not." Sir Saul turned from him, staring into the empty grate. "You think me a monster," he said hoarsely. "I loved her, as best such a man can love. But when she grew, and her eyes grew like her mother's, no, I could not bear it. I meant only to stop the marriage, not to God, not this." Holmes's voice softened, though his words were no gentler. "Yet by your payment you loosed the chain of events that led to her death. Fisher was never content with one purse when two would serve. He turned from master to pawn, using your secret as his key. He urged Armitage's jealousy, painted Evelina's meetings with him as betrayal, and so brought the quarrel to its bloody close. You are guilty not of murder, Sir Saul, but of pride, and pride, as ever, builds its own scaffold." The man's breath rattled, his fingers trembling on the desk. "You mean to expose me?" "I mean to write the truth, no more, no less. Whether it sees the press is for the law to decide." Holmes rose. "Armitage will face his trial. Fisher will hang. As for you, Lestrade may show mercy if you show repentance. If not, the newspapers will." Sir Saul's eyes lifted to Holmes's with sudden, desperate cunning. "You have no proof," he said. "Only conjecture." Holmes drew from his pocket the slip of folded parchment Fisher had carried. On the contrary, Fisher's note refers to Sir S. You will observe that the hand trembles on the final stroke. The same tremor appears in a letter signed by yourself to the same man a month ago, which I obtained this morning from the printer in Chandos Street. A coincidence, perhaps, but I have never believed in coincidences where guilt is concerned. The blow struck home. The man sagged, his shoulders bowing as if beneath the weight of his own ruin. "You have me," he said at last, his voice a whisper. "God forgive me, I never thought the world so small." Holmes's reply came quietly. "It is smaller still for those who run in circles, Sir Saul. Confession will earn you peace, if nothing else. The inspector will arrive within the hour." We left him there, hunched before his cold hearth, his silence heavier than any chain. Outside, the wind had strengthened, snapping the last leaves from the trees. Holmes hailed a cab, but did not enter it. He stood a moment, his gaze fixed on the blurred reflection of the house in the puddled street. "There is tragedy, Watson," he said, "and there is the foolish imitation of it men make when they mistake selfishness for love. In this case they have become one and the same. It will be years before the world paints over the stain of this affair." "And yet," I said, "you pitied him." Holmes turned to me with that remote half-smile which conceals more than it reveals. "Pity, my dear Watson, is not approval. It is only the mind's acknowledgement that the heart may err where logic never would." He drew up the collar of his coat. "Come. There is work still to be done before the courts and the press devour what remains of these people. I must see Aurelia Vane once more. The living deserve a verdict as much as the dead." We walked back through the whitening fog, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the wind. And though the case seemed closed, I could not shake the image of the portrait in that haunted studio, two faces, one unfinished, the other scarred by the painter's crimson stroke, each, in its way, a mirror of the human heart, both creator and destroyer of its own masterpiece. We found Madame Aurelia Vane in the small lodging off Meard Street where we had last left her. The air was heavy with that peculiar stillness which follows exhaustion, and her pallor had deepened to the faint ivory of one who has lived too long upon remorse. She was seated by the window, her gaze turned not outward, but downward to the hands clasped in her lap. Holmes stood for a moment regarding her in silence, his face unreadable, before he spoke. "Madame," he said at last, "I have come to tell you the storm has passed. Fisher will hang, Armitage will live, though behind bars for a time, and Sir Saul Dilke has confessed what his pride had long denied. The truth, once a shadow, now stands full in the light." She did not move, save to tighten her fingers upon one another. "The light," she repeated softly, "is not kind to those who have lived too long in the dark, Mr. Holmes." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "And yet without it, madame, there can be no end. Darkness preserves, but it also corrodes. You, perhaps more than any of us, understand that." At this, she lifted her eyes, those same eyes that had once made London applaud, and lovers despair. "And what of my sister's child?" she asked. "What of Evelina's name? Will the world remember her as what she was, or as what they made her?" Holmes's gaze softened. "The world," he said, "remembers what it is told, and I have some small influence with those who tell it. It shall be known that Miss March died through the deceit of men, not through her own folly. And if any moral is to be drawn, it will be drawn from their vanity, not her innocence." She exhaled, a sound between a sigh and a sob. "Then she is avenged." "Justice," said Holmes, "is not vengeance, though it sometimes borrows the same tools. There remains, however, one matter unspoken. You said, when we first met, that Fisher's he had taken the pearls again. Did you mean Sir Saul Dilke?" Aurelia's eyes darkened with the weight of memory. No, Fisher had already turned from him by then. There was another, one who hated both men and used Fisher's schemes to settle a score of his own. A painter whose pride was greater even than Sir Saul's purse. Fisher boasted of his hold upon Armitage, but it was the artist who believed he could control the scene. When he struck that blow, he thought to destroy the proof of his own degradation. The letter she carried, the one that named her father, he burned with her portrait. Holmes's brows lifted. "A letter?" "Yes," she said faintly. "Evelina had found it among my old things. I begged her to forget it, but she wished her life to begin in honesty, not in lies. She was going to show it to Lucian that night before they were married. Fisher knew, and so did Sir Saul. But neither guessed how deep the shame of an artist can run when he finds he has painted himself into ruin. When Lucian saw that letter, saw the proof of what she was and who had bought her sittings, his reason broke. He struck in horror, not hatred." Holmes stood very still. "Then the truth is more bitter than any I had imagined. He killed the woman he loved to erase the stain her birth had revealed, believing he had been deceived by all, by her, by you, and by his patron. He has confessed, but not the why. That, perhaps, was too monstrous for even him to voice." Aurelia rose, her frailty veiled by a sudden dignity. "You are wrong, Mr. Holmes. It was not monstrous, it was human. We are all guilty of that crime. I concealed her birth for fear of pity, Sir Saul for fear of scandal, Fisher for profit, Armitage for love of his own name. We were each a thread in the same noose." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "A noose, perhaps, but not without a knot of redemption. Truth once spoken can strangle deceit." He turned toward the door. "I have nothing further to ask you, madame. You may leave London without fear. Scotland Yard has no quarrel with those whose punishment lies within." She gave a small, weary smile. "I shall go where the fog does not follow, Mr. Holmes, perhaps to Paris, where no one remembers a name, only a face." As we stepped once more into the street, the pale dawn had begun to dissolve the last veils of mist over Soho. Holmes walked in silence, his eyes upon the paving stones, as though they traced a problem even yet unsolved. When at last he spoke, it was in a tone half meditation, half fatigue. "You see, Watson," he said, "there are crimes which no law can punish, because they are committed not by wickedness but by weakness. The world calls such things accidents of passion, but they are born of the same vanity that drives empires to ruin. A refusal to see truth when it is uncomfortable." "And yet," I ventured, "you will not let this case rest." He smiled faintly. "Rest, yes, forget no. The human heart, Watson, is a most unreliable witness. It must be studied as carefully as any footprint upon the floor. And there is always one more print, the mark of the mind that planned it all. Fisher was but an opportunist, Dilke a coward, Armitage a victim of his own pride. But the world that applauds beauty and sneers at honesty, that, my friend, is the true conspirator, and it goes untried." When we reached Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson met us with a telegram. Holmes opened it, scanned the contents, and passed it to me. It bore Lestrade's brief hand. "Fisher found dead in cell, poison concealed in cane head, no doubt self-administered. Case closed." Holmes read the words a second time, then placed the slip carefully upon the mantel. "The curtain falls exactly where the playwright intended," he murmured. "He exits with his vanity intact, though not his breath. I watched him light his pipe, the smoke curling upward, like the ghosts of all those faces, the painter, the singer, the guardian, the girl, each bound to the other by threads of deception and pride." For a long while neither of us spoke. Then, with that abrupt change of mood that marks his most human intervals, Holmes smiled. "Come, Watson," he said, "there is a concert at St. James's Hall this evening. I am told the violinist is passable, and I feel in need of a little harmony after so much discord." And so it was that we left behind the case of the man who painted murder, its colours fixed forever upon the canvas of memory, where love, pride, and guilt bled together into one long, indelible stroke. Holmes remained by the window long after we had returned from Aurelia Vane's lodgings. The city below was grey again, an ashen sprawl of roofs and chimney smoke, as though the night had laid its mourning veil over London. I busied myself with notes, yet even the scratch of my pen seemed an intrusion upon that stillness which wrapped my friend. It was not the silence of satisfaction, but of thought, a deep inward accounting that always preceded his final summation. When at last he turned, there was a faint, almost wistful smile about his lips. "You perceive, Watson," he said, "how the end was contained in the beginning. The case has run its full circle, as most human tragedies do. Pride conceived it, deceit nourished it, and love, poor, blind, unreasoning love, gave it its mortal stroke. Nothing could be simpler once the pattern was drawn." I closed my notebook. "Simpler perhaps to you, Holmes, but to the rest of us it has been a labyrinth. Tell me, you are convinced now that the death was not premeditated murder?" He nodded. "Convinced beyond cavil. Armitage's act was one of passion ungoverned, not design. Fisher's hand moved him as a puppeteer moves a doll, but even Fisher did not foresee that a proud man's vanity would turn upon itself so fatally. Sir Saul's sin was cowardice, not cruelty. He sought to bury a past that refused the earth. And Madame Vane, She was merely the echo of that sin sounding too late for repentance. He walked to the hearth and stirred the embers thoughtfully. Observe, my dear fellow, how each played a part in that fatal tableau in the studio. The painter, who worshipped beauty but not truth. The guardian, who feared scandal more than conscience. The agent, who trafficked in secrets as others trade in coin. And the singer, who mistook concealment for protection. Between them, they built a perfect illusion, until the illusion itself demanded blood to remain believable. Miss March's death was the inevitable correction of a falsehood too long sustained. I said nothing for a while. Outside, the faint peal of St. Paul's bells drifted through the mist, solemn as a requiem. "And what of Armitage?" I asked at length. "Do you think the law will spare him?" Holmes's gaze met mine. "The law may condemn him, but time will not. There are crimes the gallows cannot expiate, and others it should never touch. The man who painted murder found in that instant of madness that he had painted his own soul. He will carry that portrait within him far longer than any sentence could last." He turned away from the fire and crossed to his violin case, drawing from it the familiar instrument with an almost tender gesture. There are moments, Watson, when deduction is of no further use. The mind sees too clearly, the heart not enough. Only music restores the balance. As the first low notes filled the room, I felt the story settling into its proper repose, each question answered, each life accounted for. Holmes's bow moved like a whisper through the fog that curled at the window panes. The melody he played was one I knew well, slow, searching, touched with melancholy. It was not triumph, but reflection, the sound of understanding without joy. When the final chord faded, he laid the violin aside and looked at me with that dry amusement which so often followed his most profound thoughts. "You will make a tale of this one day, Watson. The public loves to imagine me as an icicle, incapable of warmth. You may tell them, if you wish, that I once pitied a murderer and despised a gentleman in equal measure." "I shall tell it exactly as it occurred," I said. He laughed softly. "Then they will not believe a word of it. Truth is seldom the friend of reputation." The clock struck midnight. The city's noise had dwindled to the distant rumble of a solitary carriage. Holmes poured a measure of brandy into 2 glasses and handed one to me. "To the dead," he said quietly, "and to the living who must endure them." We drank in silence. The fire sank low, throwing long shadows across the room, strange shapes that seemed to shift with the smoke. At last, Holmes spoke again, more softly than before. "I told you once, Watson, that art and crime are close cousins. This affair has proved it beyond doubt. To create beauty or to destroy it, both require imagination, and imagination, ungoverned, is the most dangerous gift of all. The man who painted murder merely gave form to what was already in his heart." He glanced toward the window where the first faint streaks of dawn began to show through the fog. "Let us have done with it. Another case will come, another illusion to dispel. London never sleeps long without a lie to tell." As he drew the curtains closed and the room dimmed once more, I reflected that I had indeed witnessed something beyond mere detection. The case had begun with a stroke of red across a portrait, a false wound meant to deceive, and ended with the revelation of wounds that no paint could ever conceal. Holmes had untangled the threads, as always, but even he could not restore what had been lost. He turned at the door with a faint smile. "You see, Watson, there was method even in that crimson stroke. It was both signature and confession. The artist merely revealed in pigment what his conscience had long declared in silence." I followed him out into the pale morning. the air sharp and bracing after the long night. The fog was lifting, the street lamps paling, and somewhere far off a milk cart rattled toward Baker Street. Beside me, Holmes drew his coat tight and raised his collar against the wind. "The city awakens," he said, "and so must we." Thus ended the case of the man who painted murder, a tale in which art imitated life too closely, and life, in turn, repaid the compliment with death. And as we walked together through the waking streets, I could not help but feel that even the great detective, beneath all his brilliance, carried a trace of that same red upon his mind, an indelible reminder that the keenest reason, when confronted with human passion, must sometimes bow before its own frailty.